At 9:56 in the morning on July 4th, 2026, a boat left a private dock on El Camino Real Road in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. Nolan Wells was on it. He was 18 years old. He was a wide receiver for the Southwest Mississippi Community College football team. He was one of the tallest people in the group. The photos from that morning show him towering above his friends, his arm casually slung around their shoulders, smiling for the camera. He was going to Horn Island to celebrate the 4th of July. At 11:14 in the morning, the boat arrived at Horn Island, a barrier island approximately 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, uninhabited, federally protected, no shelters, no facilities, no communications. On July 4th, it was packed with people. The GPS data, released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, is specific about what happened next. The boat stayed on the island until 4:31 in the afternoon. Then it departed. Nolan Wells was not on it. His body was found 2 days later, on July 6th, by a National Park Service agent patrolling the island's northwestern shoreline. He was face down in the water, fully clothed. There were no immediately apparent signs of physical injury. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lynn said as much. The Sheriff's Department said no foul play had been identified. The initial characterization was a possible accidental drowning. The family said no. This is Forensic Disconnect, and today we are going to go through everything the investigation has produced since Nolan Wells disappeared from Horn Island on July 4th. The GPS data, the emergency audio, the conflicting witness accounts, the friend who finally broke his silence, the girl who was the last person to speak with him, what her family said when they finally spoke, and the independent autopsy that produced the most consequential and the most frustrating 4 words in this entire case: undetermined pending further investigation. Before we go further, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at Forensic Disconnect, we cover the cases that deserve to be remembered. Subscribe. Let's start with who Nolan Wells was, because the photographs from that July 4th morning are the specific images that turned a Mississippi drowning investigation into a national conversation about race and justice in 2026. Nolan was 18. He grew up in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a coastal city of approximately 17,000 people, about 79% white according to the latest census data. He was a football player, a wide receiver with enough talent to play at the college level. His parents, Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley, described him as someone who never stayed behind. "If you be with me, you come back with me," his father told CBS Mornings. That was their understanding of who their son was. He stayed with his group. He came home with the people he arrived with. The photographs from the boat that morning show Nolan surrounded by friends who are, with 1 or 2 possible exceptions, white. In a state with Mississippi's history, with its specific, documented, violent racial past, with the weight of every name that history carries, those photographs landed with a specific force that transcended the individual case. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who is representing the Wells family, said it directly. The photos of a young black man surrounded by mostly white friends on a boat in Mississippi, who ends up dead while they make it home, is the specific image that the country cannot ignore without examining what it means. That examination has produced grief, national attention, social media speculation, community divisions, and a parallel investigation track alongside the official one. It has also produced threats. The FBI confirmed it is probing threats against witnesses and officials in the Nolan Wells investigation. Threats serious enough to require federal involvement. 60 witnesses have been interviewed. The FBI is helping examine digital evidence. The grand jury will eventually decide whether any charges are warranted, District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath has confirmed. Now let's go to the GPS data and what it tells us. Because the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources data is the most specific factual record of what happened on July 4th, and it establishes a timeline that raises specific questions about the boat's movements and the specific moment when anyone on that boat should have noticed Nolan was not with them. The boat left El Camino Real Road dock at 9:56 a.m. It arrived at Horn Island at 11:14 a.m. It stayed on the island until 4:31 p.m. It departed at 4:31 p.m. and returned to its original departure dock. It then traveled into Fort Bayou around 5:52 p.m. before returning to the dock at 6:06 p.m. Later that evening, the boat was removed from the water and transported to the owner's home in Biloxi. The GPS tells you where the boat was. It does not tell you where Nolan was. It does not tell you when the people on the boat realized he was not with them. It does not tell you whether anyone looked for him before leaving the island, or whether anyone called out for him, or whether anyone made a decision to leave without confirming he was accounted for. What it does tell you is that the boat left at 4:31 p.m. and that Nolan Wells was last seen on the island at approximately 3 p.m., based on the account of Warren Hudson, who said he spoke with Nolan around that time and Nolan indicated he would get a ride home with another group. That is a 90-minute window. Between 3 p.m. when Warren last spoke to him and 4:31 p.m. when the boat departed. 90 minutes during which something happened to Nolan Wells on an island packed with July 4th revelers, and nobody has publicly confirmed what it was. Now, let's go to the emergency audio. Because this is the specific new development that changed the picture of what happened on the boat on July 4th, and it is the audio that the title of this video references. NBC News obtained the audio through a records request. It captures the group calling for emergency towing assistance on the afternoon of July 4th after their boat's bilge pump failed. The recording is specific. The person operating the boat said, "Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're going. We're sinking. Can you all please come? I want to get this boat unsank and towed back." A dispatcher responded, asking whether everyone on board was accounted for and in good health. The caller confirmed they were. Everyone on board was accounted for and in good health at the moment of that towing call. That exchange is significant for two reasons. First, it confirms that the boat experienced a mechanical failure that forced an emergency departure. The bilge pump failed. The boat was taking on water. They needed to be towed. This is potentially the explanation for why they left the island without ensuring Nolan was on board. An emergency departure, a boat that was sinking, a scramble to get people onto the vessel and call for help. And in that scramble, Nolan was left behind. Second, the dispatcher asked whether everyone was accounted for, and the caller confirmed they were. That confirmation, everyone is accounted for and in good health, was made at a moment when Nolan Wells was still on Horn Island. Whether that confirmation was accurate in the caller's understanding, or whether it was a misrepresentation of the situation, is one of the specific questions the investigation is examining. The audio does not resolve the question of whether Nolan was deliberately left behind or accidentally left behind in the chaos of a sinking boat emergency. But it is the most specific public evidence of what the group experienced in the moments before they departed the island without him. Now let's go to the witnesses, because the specific accounts that different people have given about what happened on July 4th are the specific contradictions that Ben Crump has said make the family skeptical that they are getting the full truth. Warren Hudson called Nolan his best friend. He was one of the last people to speak with Nolan on July 4th. He appeared on a podcast with conservative commentator Brandon Tatum on July 21st, the first public interview from someone who was on the island that day, and said the island was covered with people and most were partying and drinking alcohol. He said he saw Nolan last at around 3 p.m. He said Nolan indicated he would get a boat home with another group. Hudson said the rumors that he was involved in Nolan's death are crushing. He told the New York Post, "It's a sick world we're living in. It's terrible. Nolan was my best friend. There are no facts out, just a lot of rumors. That's just how the internet is today. It's horrible." He did not discuss how Nolan became separated from the group. He focused on the lead-up to the trip and their friendship. The specific question of what happened between 3 p.m. and 4:31 p.m., the 90-minute window, was not publicly addressed in the portion of the interview that was shared. Now let's go to Katie. Because the girl Nolan was last seen speaking with before the boat departed is the specific witness who remained unidentified for weeks, who became known publicly only as Katie, and whose family has now broken their silence about what she saw and what she told investigators. Katie McCormack is 19 years old. She was on Horn Island on July 4th with a different group of friends, not the group Nolan arrived with. She spoke with Nolan sometime in the early to mid-afternoon. She was the last person known to have had a conversation with him. Her sister, Gracie McCormack, spoke to the Daily Mail. She said, "Katie had a conversation and assumed that Nolan was getting ready to get on the boat he came out on. Katie assumed the friends telling him to get on the boat wouldn't have left him. Katie assumed the friends wouldn't leave without him. That specific statement, Katie assumed the friends telling him to get on the boat wouldn't have left him, is the most important new detail in the case from a witness perspective. It means that when Nolan and Katie spoke, other people were telling Nolan to get on the boat, that other members of the group were aware he was on the island and were directing him toward the boat, and that Katie, based on that interaction, believed Nolan would be on the boat when it left. He was not. The GPS data confirms the boat left at 4:31 p.m. His body was found on July 6th. Gracie also said that Katie was on the island with a different group and later left with her brother and his fiancée, that the family has fully cooperated with investigators and with the Wells family. And critically, Katie has not spoken publicly about the case. The McCormack family's statement through Gracie is not an interview with Katie. It is the family's characterization of what Katie experienced and what she believed in the moments before she left the island. The specific content of what Katie told investigators, the detailed account of her conversation with Nolan, of what exactly was said, of who was telling him to get on the boat and what the tone of that interaction was, is information that the investigation has and the public does not. Now let's go to the independent autopsy. Because the July 22nd announcement of the preliminary results is the specific development that produced the 4 words this case is now defined by: undetermined pending further investigation. Dr. Sonara Mitchell, the pathologist hired by the Wells family to conduct an independent examination of Nolan's remains, said the manner of death is undetermined pending further investigation. The preliminary report noted a red discoloration on the back of Nolan's head and neck. Dr. Kendall Von Crowns, the chief medical examiner in Tarrant County, Texas, who was not involved in the Wells case but was asked by CNN to comment on the finding, said the discoloration could represent decompositional changes of the musculature, or it could be from blunt force injury to the back of the head and neck. Could be decomposition. Could be blunt force injury. Those are 2 very different things. Decomposition is the expected biological process of a body that has been in warm Gulf Coast water for 2 days. Blunt force injury to the back of the head and neck is evidence of violence. The independent autopsy cannot determine which one it is. Not yet. The toxicology results had not been received at the time of the preliminary report. The official autopsy conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office on July 7th has not yet been publicly released. The specific answer to what that discoloration represents is the answer the investigation needs to provide, and it has not provided it yet. Ben Crump said after the announcement, "We still have more questions than we have answers at this time." Nolan's father said he did not believe his son decided to stay on the island by himself. He said, "If you be with me, you come back with me." He said if he had been in that situation, he would have told the others, "You're going to get back on this boat with me because I don't want to answer to your parents if something happens to you." His son never made it back. Let's go deeper into what the specific sequence of the emergency audio reveals about the dynamics of those final hours on the island. Because the bilge pump failure is not just a mechanical detail, it is potentially the specific circumstance that explains how an 18-year-old ended up left behind on an uninhabited island 10 miles from shore while the people he came with went home. A bilge pump failure is an emergency. When a bilge pump fails on a boat that is taking on water, the people on the boat have one immediate priority: get the boat to a point where it is no longer sinking. That means getting people on board, getting the engine running, calling for help, and moving. It is the specific kind of emergency in which the normal procedures of accounting for everyone, making sure no one is left behind, confirming before departure that the group is complete. Those procedures can fail. Not because anyone made a decision to leave Nolan, but because the emergency compressed the time and attention available for the confirmation that should have happened. The caller told the dispatcher, "We're going. We're sinking." The urgency of those words is the urgency of someone managing a crisis. The confirmation that everyone was accounted for and in good health was made in the context of that crisis. Whether it was an accurate confirmation, whether the person who made it actually knew where Nolan was at that moment, is the specific question the investigation is examining through its interviews with 60 witnesses. Gracie McCormack's statement about what Katie saw is the specific piece of evidence that the bilge pump emergency theory has to account for. She said other people were telling Nolan to get on the boat. That means Nolan knew the boat was leaving, that other members of the group were aware he was still on the island and were directing him toward the departure. The bilge pump emergency does not explain why. If people were aware Nolan needed to board and were telling him to board, he was not on the boat when it left. That gap between people telling him to get on the boat and the boat leaving without him is the 90-minute window that the investigation has not publicly explained. Now let's also examine what the FBI's involvement tells us about how federal law enforcement is reading this case. The FBI statement on the Nolan Wells investigation was specific. While the FBI has assisted with certain aspects of the investigation in which federal tools and partnerships proved valuable to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the JCSO is leading and will continue to lead the investigation. The FBI is assisting, not leading. JCSO is the lead agency. The FBI's role is supporting the county investigation with federal resources, specifically digital evidence analysis, which the sheriff confirmed, and specifically the investigation of threats against witnesses and officials. That last detail, the FBI is investigating threats against witnesses and officials, is the specific element of this case that tells you something about its emotional intensity and about the specific fear that some people in this case may be experiencing. Witnesses in an investigation who face threats serious enough to require FBI involvement are witnesses whose situation is affecting what they are and are not willing to say publicly. The investigation is interviewing 60 people. At least some of those 60 people have been threatened. Who is threatening witnesses in a drowning investigation? That question does not have a publicly available answer. But the fact that the FBI is involved in investigating those threats tells you that the social dynamics around this case, in a community of 17,000 people along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, where the racial composition and the specific history of the state are part of how everyone is reading everything, are producing pressure that is affecting the investigation's ability to get full, unguarded accounts from people who were there. Now let's talk about the racial dimension explicitly, because Ben Crump has put it on the table and the case cannot be understood without engaging with it. Crump took the case because the specific image, a young black man who does not make it home from a boat trip with white friends in Mississippi, is the specific image that his career and his platform are built around demanding answers for. His statement at the July 10th New York press conference was direct. The photos of Nolan Wells surrounded by his friends became a symbol of something specific about Mississippi, about who gets left behind, about whose death gets treated as an accidental drowning, and whose gets scrutinized. Mississippi's racial history is not ancient. The Till Memorial in Sumner, Mississippi, the courthouse where Emmett Till's murderers were acquitted in 1955, is a few hours' drive from Ocean Springs. The state's documented history of racial violence, of black bodies found in bodies of water, of investigations that moved with a different level of urgency depending on who the victim was. That history is the specific context that Crump is invoking, and that context does not require anyone on that boat to have done anything wrong to be relevant. What Crump is saying is that the specific circumstances of Nolan Wells' death, young black man, white friends, Mississippi water, body found 2 days later, initial characterization as accidental drowning, no foul play identified, require a level of scrutiny proportionate to that history. That the family deserves answers. That the 90-minute window deserves an explanation. That the discoloration on the back of his head deserves a definitive determination, not a preliminary undetermined. The official investigation is giving Crump that scrutiny, at least in terms of resources. 60 witnesses. FBI involvement. Grand jury consideration. The DA treating it as a priority. But the family's skepticism about what they are being told and Crump's public pressure reflect the specific gap between the official investigation's process and the family's trust in that process, a gap that Mississippi's history has made very wide. Now let's go to what happens next. Because the specific investigative thread still running will eventually produce the specific answers that the preliminary autopsy could not. The official autopsy from the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office conducted on July 7th has not been publicly released. That report, when it is released, will either confirm or challenge the independent autopsy's undetermined finding. If the official autopsy finds a cause of death, drowning for example, with or without contributing factors, the two autopsies will need to be reconciled. If the official autopsy also finds the discoloration on the back of the head and neck, and if it also cannot determine whether it represents decomposition or blunt force injury, the undetermined finding from the independent autopsy will be reinforced. If the official autopsy can determine which it is, that determination changes everything. The toxicology report is the other critical pending result. If Nolan had substances in his system, alcohol, drugs, medications, that could have impaired his ability to swim, that information changes the drowning narrative. An accidental drowning after substance impairment is a different story from an accidental drowning in a person who was fully capable of swimming. Nolan's family has said he could swim. His father has said he would not have stayed on the island alone. If the toxicology shows no substances, those parental accounts gain more weight. If it shows something unexpected, the questions become different. Nolan Wells' phone is being independently investigated by Crump's team. The phone's contents, messages, location data, photos taken on July 4th, are the specific digital record of what Nolan was doing and communicating in the hours before his death. The FBI is helping examine digital evidence more broadly. Whatever is on those devices, in those accounts, in the digital record of July 4th on Horn Island, is the specific evidence that will either resolve the 90-minute window or deepen the questions about it. The grand jury will eventually receive the case. DA McElrath has confirmed that once the investigation is complete, it goes to a grand jury. The grand jury will review the evidence and determine whether any charges are warranted. That process does not have a timeline. It happens when the investigation is complete. The investigation is not yet complete. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He was a wide receiver. He was taller than almost everyone in the photos from that morning. He went to Horn Island to celebrate the 4th of July with his friends, the people he trusted, the people he was laughing with in the photographs taken at the dock. He did not come home with them. No witnesses have publicly confirmed seeing him after approximately 4:30 p.m. on July 4th. His body was found face down in the water on July 6th. The independent autopsy said undetermined. The official autopsy has not been released. The toxicology is pending. The FBI is investigating threats against witnesses. 60 people were interviewed. The grand jury will eventually decide. His father said, "If you be with me, you come back with me." That was how Nolan lived. The boat came back without him. If you have any information about what happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island on July 4th, 2026, contact the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Tips can also be submitted to the FBI's Jackson Field Office. Hit the like button. Subscribe to Forensic Disconnect. Drop a comment. Do you think Nolan's death was an accident, or do you believe there is more to this story? We read every single comment. We will be back tomorrow.